so eventually I ran myself so dry that one day I woke up and I had the worst case of vertigo and adrenal fatigue you could ever imagine. Woke up, hands and feet frozen, shivering. Didn't have a fever, but my nervous system and adrenal system were just shot. And I stood up, fell back down in my bed. And so at that point, to make a long story short, I quit everything besides the job that was paying the bills and using. And so that's when I started getting completely out of control. I was drinking 2 bottles of wine every day, at least, sometimes 3, and a whole bottle of NyQuil when I would get home from work so that I would sleep all day. And then I would wake up and I would use either coke or amphetamines. Sometimes I'd crack open 10 to 16 Vyvanse at a time or throughout the night and take them all throughout the night. And so I just run in this rat race, started getting suicidal and having suicidal ideations, and got to my darkest moment when I was going to do it.
Thanks for tuning in to the Elevation Recovery Podcast, your hub for addiction recovery strategies, hosted by Chris Scott and Matt Finch.
Welcome to episode 210 of the show. This is Matt Finch, and joining us today is a very special guest, Alex, known as SoberFit Alex on Instagram, is a life coach that helps people to stay sober, optimize their mental health, and evolve to live a fit, healthy, and happy life. With close to 2 years off alcohol and drugs, Alex states that the recovery process isn't sexy. Most of us used to like to fly by the seat of our pants. You need a structured plan so you know what to do when shit hits the fan. Plain and simple. And now, without further ado, let's hear from our very special guest, Alex Bales. Thanks so much for joining me, Alex. It's great to have you on the show today.
Hey, yeah, thank you so much for having me as well. I'm super excited and grateful to be here for the opportunity to share with you and your audience.
You're a very positive dude. That's what I noticed. The first thing when I heard another podcast you were on recently, it's like, this guy is full of not just positivity. You got a great attitude. You've done a lot of personal growth, body, mind, and spirit growth in all those areas. But also, you're very service oriented. You love to be helpful, to add value. So I can't wait for you to add value to our audience and also share some of your story. Why don't we start at your childhood, when you were saying in that one other podcast how you always used to be really sensitive, overly sensitive. You were deeply sensitive from a certain age that you remember. Why don't you talk about, because I get this so much. I work with a lot of people, as I'm sure you do too, that also say, ever since I was young, I remember being, more sensitive than everyone else.
Yeah, absolutely. I thought something was looking back for a long time, I thought something was seriously wrong with me as a little kid, because I used to go to school and I used to, I can vividly remember standing out at the bus stop as a kid and crying and not wanting to get on the bus. And I remember my mom having to talk to the bus driver about me getting on the bus and being scared to sit with the other kids. And when I would go to school, I can distinctly remember being in kindergarten and being sent to the social worker because I was crying in class. And looking back, I was a very anxious and shy and introverted kid. And I think that really stemmed from the fact that from a very early age, I've always been very intuitive and empathic, and I just didn't know how to handle that at a young age. And it was a bit problematic, especially in relationships, because I didn't fit in with a lot of the young boys at a very young age. So they were all playing with cars and doing puzzles and having sword fights, and it just wasn't it wasn't my thing. So at a very young age, I was just extremely sensitive, and it made things difficult for me, and I never really felt like I fit in.
Do you feel like, and I've heard people voice this and communicate and articulate this in different ways. The way I describe it when I was growing up is I always felt like people had something that I was lacking. I was like, God or whatever created all this stuff, made everyone else normal, but there's something lacking in me. I saw other people being happy and being calm. But I like you, when I heard that other interview you did recently, I was like, man, this is so hitting home, being really sensitive and also being told by family, friends, teachers, God, it's not that big of a deal. Don't be so sensitive. I remember my dad yelling at me and stuff. And so in different cultures, and certainly in the path of mankind, the revolution and the hunter gatherers days, and the people that were really sensitive, highly empathic, like you're talking about, those were the shamans.
Hmm.
Those were the shamans. They were like, back in the day, everyone had their place. The
Yes.
people, the hunters, the shamans, the medicine people. Nowadays in American culture, and I know things are starting to change, but we don't value that high sensitivity, that intuition that much. It wasn't until a few years ago, maybe 5 years ago, 6 years ago, that I learned about sensory processing sensitivity,
Hmm.
perhaps highly sensitive person. And
Yeah.
I'm one of those, and I can usually tell other people too, through their body language and communication. And
Hmm.
so there's 20% of adults, or sorry, 20% of all humans and 20% of animals too, innately have this trait, SPS, the highly sensitive person. Papaya, my parrot, I could tell when I first met her, when I went to the pet store in Hawaii, in Oahu, where I was living at the time. And she came right up to me, and it was like this instant love at first sight. And I knew that she was an HSP bird too. So it's like, and a lot of times people will pick pets that are HSPs. So what I've learned is that it's actually a superpower once you know how to gear your life towards becoming, like knowing that you have this SPS. So we'll get to that stuff later. But with the sensitivity, then you started to get into high school and you started to play sports and you were good at
Yeah. Starting up like late elementary and early middle school, we just happened to find that I was a really just generally athletic person. I started getting involved in basketball, and I got asked to play on like an AAU team, and I started traveling all around every single weekend, all around the country playing basketball,
Right.
and then I started doing the same thing for baseball. I didn't even play football until eighth grade, or I'm sorry, seventh grade, and then I played in eighth grade. And then by the time I was a freshman in high school, they actually put me on varsity as a freshman. I didn't start, but I went to a big high school that puts out a lot of good athletes. So there was only 3 or 4 of us that were even on varsity as freshmen. And early on, my dream was to always be a Division I athlete and to go on and to play college football, and that's what I had my eyes set on. And as I got into high school, I ended up coming across a coach, and that was because I initially came up as a quarterback, and we had a kid that was a year older than me who was a very, very, very good quarterback and went on to play in college. So they switched me positions, and I went over to play defense. And, some of the guys that were on the team handled this individual just fine. But being the really highly sensitive person that I was, I couldn't handle it. And looking back, it's caused me a lot of PTSD to this day. But he was verbally and emotionally abusive to both myself and a lot of the other athletes. And so this became extremely problematic, not only because I was dealing with this individual in football, but he actually also took over the head coaching job as the baseball coach. So I was dealing with him in multiple sports.
Half
And
the
so
year,
basically,
huh?
yeah. And so basically, what happened in both sports was um, I started out doing really, really well with him. But the moment that my performance dropped, or that I didn't do or perform up to his expectations, he started berating me and coming after me. And while a lot of kids, like I said, could brush that off, I wasn't able to. And so what would happen to me is I would get out there and I was playing scared not to make a mistake. It actually felt like I was in quicksand and I would actually freeze up. I was stuck in my body and I couldn't move. And so my performance dropped so bad that I actually got benched as a junior in baseball, benched as a junior in football, didn't even play football as a senior because my mental health got so bad. So it was either my parents were going to go in and talk to him and the administrators, or I wasn't going to be able to play. And I didn't want to seem like a pussy, to be honest with you. So I just didn't play. And my mental health got so bad that I was going to school. I was always an honor roll student growing up, straight A's in elementary school. I went to like the regional competition for spelling bee. It always came very easy to me. So I went from being a straight A student to basically a C student, and went from honors classes to all of the slower classes, the track 3 classes. I would go to school and I would just sit there with my head down all day, and I felt detached from my body. I mean, I was in full on apathy at that point. And yeah, so that kind of recaps my entire high school experience. So not exactly ideal or normal compared to what most people probably deal with.
That sounds awful, man. That sounds so traumatizing to be around half the year on football and baseball, having this totally abusive, narcissistic, angry, psychotic coach that, and that's probably what his dad was like to him, or maybe his coaches were like to him. Maybe he
Mm-hmm.
was alcoholic. Maybe he was a dry drunk. Maybe he had some crazy shit going on. But then things didn't end for you right there. I
Mm-hmm.
believe pretty soon after that, I remember one part where you had come down with like this gnarly version of mono from Epstein Barr virus, which I've done a lot of research on, and that shit and a lot of Americans have it and don't even know, and it's causing all sorts of problems. So
Mm-hmm.
when did the Epstein Barr virus, the sicknesses, it also sounds like there might have been some serious like psychophysiological disorder stuff too, with all the trauma that can be stored in the body and manifest in anxiety disorders, physical stuff, combination of psychological and physical.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And you know what? I think you're 100% spot on. I intuitively can tell you that that's what activated the Epstein Barr, because like you said, Epstein Barr is something we all have it inside of us. It takes something to activate it or to bring it out. And I think that all of that stress and the PTSD really brought that out. So what happened was I graduate high school and I took I mean, you could call it. I went to school at a Division 3 small little school to play baseball. What they do is they pull you academic money so that you'll come and play sports, because at a Division 3 level they can't give athletic
Mm.
scholarships. So they give me a good chunk of academic money, and I wasn't even that academically impressive at that point. But anyway, so I decided, I was just like, yeah, whatever. It wasn't really my dream. It was kind of my family's dream for me at that point. And so, that summer leading up to it, though, that was my first run with drinking alcohol and substance use. So I can remember the first time I ever drank. I was in my best friend's, not my best friend now, but at the time his basement, and I took 2 swigs of vodka straight out of the bottle, and it activated something physiologically inside of me. And I can remember I just tipped it back and I just slugged it straight down. Woke up the next day and was puking, and it was actually it was probably right before I graduated. It was Mother's Day. I remember it, and I ruined my mom's Mother's Day, and I was dry heaving all day. And that whole summer, I mean, I partied nonstop. I was drinking 3 or 4 nights a week, because it made me feel better about myself, and it allowed me to. The alcohol gave me permission to authentically connect to how I felt and who I was. And so, I started drinking a lot, and then I went away to play college baseball. 2 weeks in, got Epstein-Barr virus. So I remember I got up at 5 a.m. We had to run one morning, and I couldn't breathe, and I felt like I was going to collapse. I got back to my dorm, and I said to my roommate, I said, something's wrong. I can't, something's really wrong. He's like, you're probably just coming down with a sickness. Well, I would start spiking these 103, 104 fevers all the time. My throat would swell shut. So every single weekend I would drive home, and the doctors would give me antibiotics. And so I would take them, and then it would go away. But as soon as I ceased the antibiotics, it would come back. My throat would swell up, 103, 104 fever, and I would drive home again. So it took them about 6 months of running this rat race to figure out that it was Epstein-Barr, finally, at which point they removed my tonsils. And it turned into about another year after that of chronic fatigue. I lost about 50 pounds, lost all my muscle mass because I wasn't working out. I was literally sleeping all day when I wasn't going to school, and transferred home.
Jeez, man. And it's even more intense live listening to you say it, because you talked about that in the interview I watched this morning. So I've interviewed a lot of people on here about psychophysiological disorders, and there's different names for it too. They usually say that almost always, if someone has chronic back pain, for instance, low back pain for this example, then they go in, get this surgery. Okay, the low back pain goes away, but then all of a sudden, chronic fatigue syndrome for the next year. Or maybe they get this huge anxiety disorder out of nowhere.
Mhm.
And their theory on this is that as long as we're still in an upregulated state of our nervous system, we'll continue to create all these different types of health disorders. And it's like, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. But then things still didn't start to get better for you, because I remember there was another part in your story where you were like chugging a bunch of 2 bottles of wine with a bottle of NyQuil to sleep all day, I think, and then doing coke and uppers to work a night shift. Is that correct or similar?
Yeah, absolutely.
When
I
was
mean,
that?
there's a lot in between there. So what happened was, I the first time I ever injected anything was I had some friends that I'd played sports with in high school, and they had started playing around with some anabolics. And so after I was started to get over the Epstein Barr, they were like, "Hey, you were always like a really good athlete. Maybe like fitness could be your thing. Like that could be your new outlet." I had broken some weightlifting records in high school, so I was like, that seems like something that might be kind of cool. So I took a cycle of just testosterone by itself, which turned into 3 years of testosterone use straight. And
How much were
really
you
the
taking?
testosterone, what's that?
How much were you taking? Were you like cycling it or whatever?
It just started off at 250 milligrams, then went to 500, then up to 750 at one point.
What
Um,
age did you start this at?
22, 21, 22.
That's a lot of
Yeah.
testosterone for a 22-year-old lad, huh? Okay, keep
Yeah,
going.
so now I'm a 27-year-old on replacement therapy, but regardless, we can circle back to that. So yeah, started doing that. The testosterone actually kept me healthier for longer than I would have had I not been taking it.
Mhm.
I got into a really, really toxic relationship with somebody who was really just a reflection of what was going on inside of me at the time. So my family definitely didn't approve of this relationship, and I've always had a very close relationship with my family.
Mhm.
And it just got to a point where they got to an ultimatum, and they were like, "This relationship either has to end, or you're going to have to go." And I chose to go, and I went and moved in with her and her family, and
And her family?
and her family. So I come from, and I don't have any judgments on anybody about your wealth status, but just to paint a picture for the podcast here, I come from just a middle class blue collar family. Her family was making millions, so just very different perspective of life. And so
Uh-huh.
um, her parents basically wanted to lay out our life for us. We were drinking and we were smoking a lot of weed. We were drinking wine every night. And her parents laid out my life for me. They're like, "You are going to come up in the same industry as her dad. This is what's going to happen. This is how you're going to live. We're going to make sure that you two make it big." And the relationship with her had also gone extremely toxic, had become verbally abusive both on my end and hers, and I completely owned my role in that. And one night I couldn't take it anymore, and being the individual that I was at the time, I didn't have the coping skills or the courage to face up and deal with the issues at hand, and I left in the middle of the night. So I came back home at that point. To make a long story short, we ended up breaking up, and so then I started filling all that void in my heart with just activity. So I was working full time at a big global company as a supervisor on nights, training jujitsu, going to school full
Nice.
time, not really sleeping at all, just running myself ragged into the ground, and using hard. I mean, I was doing coke, amphetamines. I was drinking every day, whatever I could get my hands on. I would do it, and I would burn it into the ground. And so eventually I ran myself so dry that one day I woke up and I had the worst case of vertigo and adrenal fatigue you could ever imagine. Woke up, hands and feet frozen, shivering, didn't have a fever, but my nervous system and adrenal system were just shot. And I
Mm.
stood up, fell back down in my bed. And so at that point, to make a long story short, I quit everything besides the job that was paying the bills and using. And so that's when I started getting completely out of control. I was drinking 2 bottles of wine every day, at least, sometimes 3, and a whole bottle of NyQuil when I would get home from work so that I would sleep all day. And then I would wake up and I would use either Coke or amphetamines. Sometimes I'd like crack open like 10 to 16 Vyvanse at a time or throughout the night and take them all throughout the night. And so I just run in this rat race, started getting suicidal and having suicidal ideations, and got to my darkest moment when I was going to do it. And I had a spiritual awakening, and I can never really articulate it in a way that makes sense to other people. And it wasn't like this profound thing where it was like, some people talk about where they like have like these blowout experiences and they go into the light or anything like that. It was just like, you don't have to live this way anymore. Now, this is how you've lived. This is who you know that you don't want to be. This is who you aren't. And this is who you're going to be. Like, you can die to who you were 15 minutes ago so that you can become something new. And that's really what those suicidal ideations were telling me, was that I needed to die to that old version and the old ideas of myself.
That's a powerful wake-up call. And not a lot of people have that type of variety where it seems like, and correct me if I'm wrong, it seems like it was like in a moment. Did this happen like you got this in one moment and then started to try to change? Or was it kind of more like starting to build up until finally you're like, done, I'm done?
Yeah, that's kind of just how everything has always worked in my life. It just builds and it builds and it builds and compounds until I tend to be stubborn and be hard headed. And I'm the kind of guy who's got to learn the hard way sometimes. And it accumulated. And I just said, I can't do it anymore. Like, it was just a full surrender.
Mhm.
It broke me down. It broke down my ego. It broke down those walls. And I was like, I can't do it. Here it is. I give up. And in that moment of surrender and just saying, like, God, take it from me, whatever you want me to do, whatever it is I got to do, like, I'll do it. I'm done. I give in. And it just, like, in that moment, things just started making sense to me. And it just felt like I just had so many insights, just letting go of who I thought I was. And I just realized that everything in my life had happened for a reason, and that I was going to use all that pain for purpose.
Have you heard of the concept post-addiction growth?
No, I have not.
It sounds like that's what happened to you. Maybe not like that technical term, but a lot of people, when they start to overcome addiction, it is, it's really slow progress, really difficult. Their mindset and thoughts don't change that much. It's really just like abstinence from either the substance or all substances. And a lot of times it's just kind of, and then they'll relapse and then they'll get back into it and then go to treatment 10 times. You sounds like you had a really powerful spiritual wake-up call, like a complete shift in, like, okay, I've tried that way of living, tried doing things this way. I wonder what this is going to be like, and I'm going to go for it. And then from there, it's just, I mean, look at the progress. I don't even know how many years you've been off. I would assume only a couple, maybe, but
2.
like 2. All right. So most people that have 2 years off of substances are not in the place you are regarding emotional maturity, regarding not just the knowledge that they have about addiction, recovery habits, health and wellness, psychology, but you have embodiment. You're embodying these values and these teachings. And that's more rare, especially after 2 years. And you also graduated from AA, I like to say. It's great. It's a great program for people that want to do that forever and they love it. Good for them. If somebody doesn't absolutely love it, at least eventually, it's probably not the right one for them. It wasn't for me. But the first, when I
Mhm.
quit this last time, a long time ago, I went to AA meetings for like the first 30 days. I think one a day. Maybe I did 25 meetings in 30 days. And I was coming off of alcohol and Xanax, and heroin. And I was taking Valium throughout the day. I was doing a Valium taper. As soon as my Valium taper wore off, then I had like a whole, I felt good. Then I was like going to the meetings and they were starting to drag me down. At the
Hmm.
beginning, they were like helping me get through that first 30 days. Eventually, I was like, fuck, I'm going to go start surfing again. I'm going to get back into playing music. Like my withdrawal symptoms are mostly gone. And it sounds like that is very similar to what you did, to where you leveraged the resource of AA for a little bit, but you didn't want to be like a lifelong big book thumper sponsoring people doing that almost 100-year-old system
Hmm.
with all the new information on neuroscience and psychology, habits. You're like, I think I can really help people do this. So from that point, how did you have to like detox off stuff? Were you physiologically dependent at that point that you needed to go to a hospital, a detox facility, or did you just do it at home?
Yeah, I did a little bit of okay, so because I was so functional, what I would do is I would rotate through things so
Sure.
that I didn't get caught and so that I would be able to function. So I would go
Mhm.
on these benders where I would like do like tons of Coke and Adderall. And then to recover from the Coke and Adderall, usually the dealer would honestly cut me off because I was getting out of control. And so then what I would do is I would switch to like painkillers or something like that. And then once I ran out of that, to take the edge off, I'd make deals with myself. Like I'd be like, okay, if you can get through your work shift today, you can drink 2 bottles of wine when you get home to take the edge off. And so I just ran that race. So I was never actually fully like in withdrawal from any one thing, but I can tell you I was in a foggy haze for about 3 months. Um, some of which was physiological, a lot of which was psychological because I had to relearn every single thing that I thought I already knew how to do. Like I didn't know how to function without drugs and alcohol anymore.
Holy moly. That's kind of rare. I have heard of other people uh, with that kind of pattern of not wanting to get physiologically dependent on one thing. So cycling things, stacking, cycling, but not being on any one substance daily long term, because then you get a huge tolerance to it and then a physical dependence. So the way you were doing it, you were like avoiding the physiological dependence, but the psychological dependence was big time there. And probably your brain was probably like, what are you doing to me, man? All
Mm-hmm.
these different types of drugs and booze, all these weird sleep schedules. Luckily, you were a young lad. All right, so
Yeah.
now we're moving into the phase where the old chapter of the old life, the addiction part, you were closing the book on that or ending the chapter. What would you name the next chapter after that? Early recovery or some other name? And then what did that next chapter it have included with it? Maybe the next year.
I would probably name it. It's not going to be a sexy name, but I would say re-knowing things in a higher way. That's what I would call it. I started to let go of all those old ideologies that I once had, and I started to. Um, I did go to AA at first, and I think we're all being guided in a certain direction, and my path was perfect for me. It taught me the exact lessons that I was lacking from my childhood, and so ironically, somebody that had been close to me and a mentor to me growing up um, was an alcoholic, and so I reached out to him and I told him what was going on, and I said I need some help, and he was like, "Oh, that's really cool, like no problem," and he took me to a meeting and I don't always say this because I know a lot of people get offended by it, but AA was, and I think you'll agree with me, and like you just mentioned, AA was really good initially for me because it got me started on a program, and just working the steps really helped me to initially feel reconnected. But what's kept me sober in the long term, and what I started doing was I started filling all of those old time spans when I would have been using with education, meditation, and learning. So I just started going on this really profound inward journey. And I started listening to different spiritual teachings. I started opening my mind up to those things. I started reading about nutrition. I started reading about the importance of rest and sleep and organic food. and I developed like my own spiritual practice, and I started healing relationships. So one of the things I did was I would actually force myself to go out and talk to people, particularly women, and just start conversations and give compliments to people. Like I just literally went on this huge self-help journey, and it's been so healing to me, just putting in that constant work on myself and continuing to just hammer away at those walls of who I thought Alex is, versus who I authentically truly am, at my soul's purpose.
A lot of people either don't know what I'm about to say or would even argue with it. But, we've got these different senses: sight, smell, physical touch, hearing. We also have the sense of intuition. It's one of our senses. And the people with this sensory processing sensitivity, my belief is that, yeah, we've got these nervous systems, central nervous systems, that process sensory stimuli deeper than people that don't have SPS. That's just all there is to it. So it's really good for creativity and music and seeing the beauty in life. And it's good for a lot of things. It's also really difficult if you don't know you have it. But one thing I got the sense from you right away is your sense of intuition, these different senses. Your intuition's obviously so strong that even when you were in the addiction lifestyle, the addiction chapter of your life, even the intuition was strong enough to even come through there and give you that wisdom. And
Yeah.
I'm even of the belief, and I can't prove this, and I'm not sure if it's true. I'm of the belief that we might even choose to have certain issues in life. And that's like, I just read this book called Discover Your Dharma, a Vedic guide to finding your purpose. And I mean, I found my purpose, like 9 years ago, somewhere around there now. So it's cool to read this book, and there's like different archetypes of, I should probably leave that for another episode. But anyways, I'm a firm believer that when we listen to the intuition, it's really trying to tell us something. It seems to know. So when you got a bunch of big book thumpers or other people saying, if you don't keep coming back, you're going to end up in jails, institutions, and dead. I'm so glad that the people that have that intuitive calling, that inner knowing to leave the rooms and to do the path that resonates with them. I feel like if people don't listen to that inner knowing, that's when we get in the most trouble in life. When we don't listen to our Jiminy Cricket conscience telling us what to do, or your parents could even see that toxic relationship you were in. They could see it. They're like, son, you're totally blowing it. So now you obviously have so much more awareness and discernment regarding relationships and people. And then eventually you started to help other people too, pretty soon after you quit, because with 2 years, I mean, it had to have been pretty soon after. And you developed your own little coaching system too, a kind of blueprint. Would you mind, because I think it's awesome, would you mind teaching our audience about this fascinating system, this
Yeah,
mental
absolutely.
model for recovery?
Yeah, absolutely. And, just to kind of backtrack just for a short second here, you know, with AA, I think my biggest gripe would be that it becomes a religion and a cult for a lot of people. And I think that they sometimes can be deceiving, because what seems like spiritual awakening and enlightenment can actually become spiritual arrogance in their case. And I get scoffed at a lot when I tell people that I'm not quite 2 years sober, but I'm coming up on it. And I get scoffed at a lot when the big book thumpers hear that I'm only almost 2 years sober. They kind of roll their eyes at me, and just a lot of things like that. And I'm not saying that everybody's like that, because like any religion, there's the good and there's the bad. But I think that there's other ways, and that's important to recognize as well. It has its place, but there's other things you can do too. So, anyways, sorry, that's just something I really felt moved to share. So, could you re-ask me the question again?
Yeah, I'll re-ask it. But also, yeah, I'm glad you shared that. I've done one episode and a few articles on basically AA deprogramming. Once you get programmed there, if you're going to not go there for the rest of your life, if you're going to leave, there needs to be a deprogramming and unlearning of that stuff that doesn't serve you anymore. So
Hmm.
at the beginning, for a lot of people, it's maybe it's good programming for them. But once they feel like, there's got to be a better way to, live a healthy, sober life, or even moderate use life other than this, then it comes down to, okay, I got to deprogram myself, because that stuff gets programmed. Maybe if we don't remember everything consciously, all of our subconscious stores it. Then all of a sudden we keep relapsing. And maybe if we never went to those meetings and got programmed so much that if I don't go to the rooms, I'm going to relapse, yada, yada, yada. So the question was, you started to help people eventually overcome addiction after you did, pretty soon after. And being the creative, highly sensitive guy that you are with the SPS and it's a superpower, you have created a system that you use to help bring clients over to the other side from addiction or from just even struggles in sobriety already, how to
Hmm.
optimize their sober life. You hold their hand. Hey, I found a way. You can customize it. You don't have to do it exactly like me. I can help you. You
Hmm.
bring them over that wall to this whole new area of much, much healthier, much more beautiful, and they can kind of set up their new home and chapter of their life over here on this side. It's so much better. So why
Hmm.
don't you talk about that system?
Yeah, so I've developed what's called my five tenets of health, and I've kind of taken it from just bits and pieces of things that I've learned about myself, and from reading a lot and doing a lot of research over time. So my five tenets are rest or sleep, exercise and energy management, nutrition and diet, relationships, and spiritual practice. So rest and sleep is extremely straightforward. At least I guess in my mind, I shouldn't say it's straightforward to everybody. So are you getting 7 or 8 hours of sleep a night? That's when you recover, that's when you heal, and your brain is not functioning optimally unless you're getting that 6 to 8 solid hours of sleep a night. There's a lot of different ways you can optimize it. I know that there's been studies shown that you can also do like 2 4 hour chunks and get the same REM cycles too there. But that's definitely something that I focus on with people in sobriety, especially because you hear that you always have to be filling up your time with things, but it's really important to give yourself that permission to allow yourself to have the rest and recovery that your body needs so that you can actually physically heal too. I think a lot of people will avoid that and think that they just always have to be hustling, but maybe that's a rant for another time. Exercise and energy management. So, do you get enough movement that stimulates you and enhances your life, but not so much that it takes away from your life and burns you out and roasts your nervous system out? Exercise is a great way to get a natural high, and it's my favorite outlet. I love, it's really empowering because my forte really is honestly strength coaching. It's really empowering to watch your body transform and to feel yourself getting stronger. And I think
Mhm.
that that's a great addiction for people in sobriety to have. Now you can have exercise addiction and it can become unhealthy, but I think for most people that's usually not a problem. Next one after that is nutrition. And this one, sometimes you got to go down the rabbit hole a little bit because this can get complicated with lots of different dietary preferences. A lot of people, when they're healing in sobriety, they'll have like gut issues, or they'll have food intolerances, or maybe we've got to clean up their diet and focus on eating organic food, or maybe we even eat a meat-based or a plant-based diet, depending on what's going on with them. But a lot of times there's a big detoxification process that needs to happen. From there, relationships, which can be pretty complicated. I do use, I think that AA, that's something that it is good at. I think the amends can be really powerful. So maybe we'll do some amending work with relationships. But um, this one is really just, in my opinion, it's about learning to communicate and to put out what you want to receive in simple terms. So we
Mhm.
will, that's something more, it's hard to articulate what I do with as far as relationship goes. But it's really just about teaching proper communication, in my opinion. And then my favorite is spiritual practice. Just you have to have something in place that leaves you feeling connected. Um, not some people have spiritual trauma, and that's totally okay. You can be religious and have a spiritual practice. You can be atheist and have a spiritual practice. Spiritual practice could be prayer and talking to God. Spiritual practice can be any various type of meditation, whether it be like a guided meditation where you're visualizing things, or one where you're just clearing your mind and trying to create space. And spiritual practice for some people, maybe that just means journaling and just getting authentic about who you are, where you want to be, what's going on in your life, and what you could do better. I think that journaling is a really powerful spiritual practice for people who maybe aren't big believers in God or a higher power. So through those 5 tenets of health, I really think that that's a really simplistic way as to how we can optimize our health and our mind and sobriety and fill up our time with healthy and good things.
Those are all fantastic. I love these like mental models, these systems, these kind of blueprints, these roadmaps that are fully customizable, because it helps orient people to this kind of like simple system that a lot of people have followed and had great success with, and that is duplicatable too. I agree with everything you've been saying like a million times, like 1,000% yes. And with sleep, oh, so many people in America have sleep issues nowadays. And that's like, doesn't matter how great someone's diet is, their exercise, their, kicking back in downtime, meditation. Let's say they're only sleeping 4 hours a night, every single night. All that other stuff is mostly canceled out and maybe even making them worse. You even also talked about that you need just enough exercise to be optimized, because if you do too much, then that's actually breaking you down and making you worse off. I'm wondering if you read the book, The Power of Full Engagement. This is yeah, some of the things that you were talking about regarding, it's like with exercise, you need to do it, but if you do too much, you're screwed. With working on spiritual fitness, when you're not doing anything, these are all your spiritual fitness muscles, your physical muscles, your relationship psychological muscles. These are all like, if you work them out and have proper time to like rest, they're going to get bigger. But then there's spiritual atrophy and muscular atrophy. You just start to just die. And if you're not growing at least a little bit, I firmly believe that progress is what leads to a lot of people feeling like meaningful lives and happiness. So even if they're just making just a little bit, they're like, all right, I'm going in the direction of my dreams, just a little bit of progress. I'm also curious what some of the most impactful books and audibles and maybe even podcasts you've listened to. I can tell you've read a lot. I know that all of our regular listeners, out of those, the ones that I know at least, a lot of them are voracious readers. And so I'd like to learn about some of the best books that you've read too, so I can put them on my list, man. I love that Discover Your Dharma book, was phenomenal. So anything like that is, whether it's health or addiction or psychology, any genre of book.
Yeah, I haven't been reading as much recently, and so I'm blanking on a few of the names, but most people are familiar with I believe it's Don Miguel Ruiz. I believe he's the author of the Four Agreements. He wrote another book that was super. Oh, you know what it is? It's The Wisdom of Shamans. I swear I read the whole thing in a day, and it's one of the best books I've ever read. And it really, really helped me to shift my perspective on things. I really like Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself and You Are the Placebo by Joe Dispenza.
Nice.
I did his meditations for quite some time. I don't do it now, but like anything, you just take bits and pieces of what you learn from different people and you apply what works in your life. So I really like him as well. I really, really, if you want to learn about holistic health, Paul Chek is probably, in my opinion, the number one health resource out there.
How to eat, move, and be healthy.
Yeah.
And his YouTube channel.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. So he kind of inspired, I'll be honest, he kind of inspired my five tenets. Now his 4 tenets or he calls it his 4 doctor system. There's definitely differences between the two, but so a lot of what he taught has inspired me, and he's been a super impactful person for me. So Yeah, he's got like his books, The Last Four Doctors You'll Ever Need, Eat, Move, and Be Healthy. And then podcast wise, I really like Aubrey Marcus's podcast. He's got a good wide variety of guests that he has on, and they talk about all kinds of stuff when it comes to holistic health. So that would be my book and podcast recommendations if you really want to learn and grow.
I've listened to or read everything that you just talked about, except for that one by Don Miguel Ruiz, The Wisdom of the Shamans. I'm going to get that right away because I read the Four Agreements. Actually, my ex-sister-in-law, I guess you would technically speaking, she used to work for him for more than a decade. Yeah, she used to work for Don Miguel Ruiz. And one year for Christmas, this is probably in my early 20s, maybe mid 20s. One year they came down for Christmas. Well, they did every year usually, but she gifted me like all of his books that he had written up to that point. I was like, oh, this stuff is so cool. Some of those tenants he's talking about too, like be impeccable with your word and really good stuff. Looking forward to reading the one you're talking about. Joe Dispenza, Dr. Joe Dispenza. That's my man right there. That's my dude. Have you seen his new series on Amazon Prime? Well, maybe it's around a year old now, and it's called Rewired.
I'm familiar with it. I have not seen it though. I need to get on that.
Dude, it's so good. Check out Rewired. I believe that's the name of it. And then who else did you mention? Paul Chek. So it's really interesting too. When I was maybe 34, I interviewed this lady, not for this podcast because it wasn't around then, but I interviewed a friend of mine that I did Qigong instructor training and certification with. And she was real successful in entrepreneurship. And at that point, I wanted to become an entrepreneur. Or maybe I was just, I hadn't got into it. I was learning about things like maybe I'll become a life coach. Maybe I'll become a Qigong instructor and make money doing this. So I was trying different things on. And while I was doing that, I asked her, what are some of the most impactful books you ever read? And she told me one of them was the Paul Chek's How to Eat, Move, and Be Healthy. She sent me one of his YouTube videos where he was doing this Qigong technique for rest and repair. Of course, all Qigongs for rest and repair, but this is one that's like really deep rest. And I became so obsessed with him for probably the next 6 months. I cleaned up my diet really good. I started to work out more. And I mean, the guy's like, I don't know how old he is. He's got to be probably in his 50s by now, maybe even 60. He could outwork out me and probably most people half his age or even a third his age. The dude's an animal. And he's not just fitness. His psychology and mindset and his beliefs, very spiritual dude. So you're bringing up some really awesome resources. That's so fantastic. These books are out there, people. There's so much cool stuff. What Alex has been doing is embodiment. He's actually learning the things and embodying them. So what are a few tips? Because I know time's getting a little bit in here. What are some tips you can give people that have been doing learning, been doing research? They're accumulating knowledge. They're listening to this podcast. They're checking out other things. And maybe they know a lot of this stuff already, but they just can't seem to either get out of the rut that they're in, or maybe they get out of a rut, but then they backslide back into it. It's hard to get enough momentum to push them out of that forever. Where it's clear to me, just judging by how you look and how you speak and what you've communicated, that you're embodying these things. You're not just teaching other people about it. You're doing what you're teaching.
Absolutely. So this is an awesome question. I'm so glad you asked this one because this is like a recurring theme for me in especially the last 6 months of my life. I think that it's important to recognize that learning and knowledge and studying is so important for your growth and it's essential. But that being said, it's not going to be the thing that saves you. Taking action is going to be the thing that saves you. Putting those things that you learn into practice. So number one, be willing to sit down and get authentic and honest about who you are, where you've been, what you're feeling, what you've been through, and where you want to go. You need to get clarity on who you want to be. The second thing I would say, and this one is really important, give yourself permission to fail. Success and growth and learning is not a straight and linear path. I have fallen off myself many, many times. I have failed and hit roadblocks and closed doors many times. But just give yourself permission to have that, because it's going to happen. And just realize that every time you get that, there's just a learning opportunity at hand. And then the third tip that I would say is allow yourself to receive the lessons that you need to learn and to evolve over time. You don't always understand in the moment why things are playing out the way they are, or how they're happening, or what's going to happen next. We all like to think that we're in control, but I think that a better approach is really just to allow things to come into your life. Again, that comes with having clarity, so you're moving forward with the right intentions, but then just allowing it to play out as you keep moving forward, and trusting and having faith in the process that these things are going to manifest and come into your life.
Ooh, such good stuff. This is a really powerful episode. And I haven't thought about the book I'm about to mention in years, but I'm such an idiot that I forgot about this book, because what you just stated there on how people can embody this knowledge and living these values. John C. Maxwell, one of my favorite authors and speakers of all time. I've probably read 10 of his books, maybe even more. But one of them, I think it's one of his worst selling books. In my opinion, it's his best book, but one of the worst selling books, and probably because the title is called Failing Forward. Who wants to buy a book that's like how to fail forward? I read that book. I was recommended that when I did my first direct sales company. So it was like network marketing. And that was one of the books they recommended, like Get Failing Forward by John C. Maxwell and these other books. You can apply the lessons from that Failing Forward book for addiction recovery. And I've never even, it's been so long, I forgot about that. So now, thank you. I've got a new powerful resource to share with people, that if you're afraid of failure, man, that book can end it or subdue it and mitigate it so much. Failing Forward by John C. Maxwell.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And failure is so good. And I hate being sensitive, and I'm sure a lot of your listeners are super sensitive. I hate failing, because it makes me feel so bad, because I feel things so deeply. But at the same time, I love it, because I always end up learning a lesson from it, or being I don't know, just the growth is in the failure and the pain. That's where the learning comes from. So I try to be mindful of that. I'm not perfect like anyone, but I just try to keep moving forward, and that's all we can do.
Right on. Well, thank you so much. Where can people find you? Where can people learn more about you, reach out to you? I know you've got a really epic Instagram, and you post on there quite a bit. I think you've got well over 1,000 followers, and you give tips, practical advice and help and resources and quotes and kind of cool, very helpful 1 or 2 liners where people can just learn about how to recover from addiction, how to get optimized with good sleep and health and psychology and all that. So yeah, where are the best places for people to find you?
Yeah, best places to find me. I'm on Facebook. You can just type in Alex Bales, Bales. I believe it's Alex. It was alexbales.560 if you want to type it up in the link at the top of your webpage, your browser. And then on Instagram, which I started out just doing this on Facebook, but Instagram seems to be where I'm heading towards now. And you'll find me on there, Sober Fit Alex. Just type it straight across. And again, it's you can also type in my name, Alex Bales, Bales. And you should be able to find me on there. I'm super interactive. If you send me a message or you add me, know that I'll actually most likely send you a voice message and just say hello, just to be a kind friend. So even if you don't want to do any coaching with me, but you just want to see what I'm doing, add me, and I'll probably shoot you a message, or feel free to shoot me one as well, just to say hey.
Perfect. Well, there you have it, folks. If you loved where this episode took us, want to learn more about Alex, want to ask him any questions, like he said, go to Facebook or Instagram, Alex Bales, Sober Fit Alex, correct?
Yep.
Alex, thanks so much. I'd love to have you on again sometime, maybe in around 6 months or sooner, if you'd be open to that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I love your podcast. Of all the podcasts I've been on, I think that yours is probably the one I enjoy listening to the most. So I appreciate it. I'm grateful, and I would absolutely love to come back. And I enjoy talking with you.